This week, Mr. Hoodlet is traveling somewhere. He's a world traveler, so I will be filling in along with Joff Thayer, where we will welcome Tim Eades. He's the CEO of vArmour for an interview to talk about basic flow of the problem, solution, and value provided by vArmour. It's going to be very interesting. And then in the application security news, popular iPhone apps secretly are recording your screen without asking. MongoDB databases are still being held for ransom. Most of the Fortune 100 still uses flawed software that led to the Equifax breach. And a Chrome extension with millions of users is now serving up pop-up ads. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Welcome, everyone, to Application Security Weekly. This is, of course, episode number 50, the 51st episode of ASW. It is February 11th, 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, here in G-Unit Studios, joined remotely by none other than Mr. Joff Thayer. Joff, welcome.
Hi, Paul. Good to be here.
Joff is a true ninja. We're just chatting before the show about network security stuff. He's also well-versed in applications. Joff, we're really lucky to have you in the Security Weekly family. I think about it. We're talking about hop redundancy, and then you have a lot of application experience under your belt. You wrote, I think it was like a linting tool, right, for Django or something like that?
Yeah, I did. I wrote a Django linting tool. I'm also the instructor for the SANS Python class for automating information security with Python. So
fantastic class.
I've got a little bit of development experience in C# and C++ and all sorts of interesting things.
Nice to have you here today. Thank you for filling in. Quick announcement before we get started. Of course, InfoSec World's happening April 1st through the 3rd. It's going to be a fun conference. We'll be there, infosecworld.misty.com/security-weekly. Of course, you can use the registration code OS19-SecWeek and get 15% off the main conference or World Pass if you're interested in doing a free briefing with myself or Matt Alderman, or you want to do a paid interview at the conference that'll air on Enterprise Security Weekly. You can go to securityweekly.com/conference request. And of course, registration is now open for our first webcast, which, Joff, you'd be interested in this one. Matt from Extra Hop will be the guest from our sponsor, of course, Extra Hop. And he's a total nerd like we are, Joff. It was awesome to talk with Matt on the prep call. We're going to talk about rising above complex workflows, practical ways to accelerate incident response. Extra Hop's software is really awesome. I think John Strand's quote was, "The interface looks so nice, I want to lick it." So make sure you check out securityweekly.com/webcasts. It's going to be great. If I can say the word /, I had to say it a lot. securityweekly.com/webcasts. How about that? Our guest for today's show, Tim has over 20 years of leadership experience in sales, marketing, and executive management. He's currently the CEO at vArmour. Tim, welcome to the program today.
Hey, it's great to be here. Super fun.
Yes, nice to have you. So I guess first start by, I want to talk about the problem that you solve over at vArmour. You know, what is vArmour and what problems or challenges are you solving for your customers today?
Sure. So vArmour is an API-driven cloud security company. So we kind of believe that the enterprises are going more and more hybrid cloud multi-cloud infrastructure. So a large bank I was talking to just the other day were doing 30% on GCP, 30% on Azure, 30% on private cloud. So the problem we solve is we believe that you need consistent policies across that infrastructure to drive consistent compliance across those infrastructures. So we focus very heavily on regulated industries going to hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, where they would like to have consistent and continuous compliance across private estates to public estates, and wherever it is. And you shouldn't care whether it's on a container estate, a virtual estate, an SDN, or a public or private cloud. So that's kind of what we solve and who we solve it for. And we built a product called an application controller that can go in and discover these environments, because most people don't understand any of their application communication flows at all. So what we do is we go in and we understand those application communication flows. We ingest a bunch of telemetry, whether it's from like a CMDB or from an agent technology or from flow logs, whatever it may be, and then to have a policy computation engine. So now you can see what could happen, what would you like to have happen, what should happen. And then we map this against frameworks, and then we distribute policies to the application wherever it resides, and control it from a compliance and a risk reduction perspective.
So, Tim, it sounds like a couple of different aspects. When I used to work in configuration management, vulnerability management, there was like the API into my AWS instances, the API into my Google Cloud, and the API into Azure. That's just one vehicle for telemetry, right? You're going to connect to all my different 100%. Clouds, pull that back, right? How my clouds are configured, right?
Exactly right. And so you can put in all the flow logs and everything else, all of the knowledge. But again, most people are multi-cloud, right? So if you have a container state, a virtual state, or something on top of ACI, whatever it is, people are just so blind to those flows, and yet they have to be regulated to GDPR, to PCI, whatever it is. So you've got to suck it in, and then have a policy computation engine say, should this happen? And to do that at scale and still make it simple is actually quite difficult.
Yeah, I'm just picturing the engineering on your team to just be able to interface with all those different cloud infrastructures and pull it in and make sense of it. I mean, that's hard for a human to do, but you've essentially automated that for us.
Yeah, so it's been a journey to map scale one axis and ease of use on the other. I mean, we have 25 financial institutions, for example, 7 or 8 service providers, but we also have churches and everything else, because literally it's a downloadable product, right? Completely self-service. So, Jimmy from a Pizza Hut chain could download it. Also from a church to a bank, and they can all download it. They can use the product. They can understand their environment. So it's all self-service. But to make it simple, to make it scale, and to make it completely dynamic is actually quite difficult. But we came out with a technology. We call it Conform. Think of it like an abstraction layer that allows you to drive kind of continuous compliance regardless of the environment. Much like HashiCorp has Terraform, this is almost like Conform is that for security, to wherever it resides.
And the information that you're pulling down is really, if you look at it like a physical network, it's kind of like internal firewalls and routers that used to be physical things that basically governed how things should talk or not talk. That all exists up in the cloud, and it's the same thing, except now it's all virtual and it's in 4 different systems, right?
Yeah, or 5 or 6 different systems. Yeah, I mean, and it's all completely dynamic because people are striving really hard for digital transformation. So it could be Kubernetes, OpenShift in one environment. It could be ESX in another environment. It could be security groups in another environment. But again, what most people really don't have is visibility into those environments at a granular enough level to make them compliant. And so mapping and understanding those relationships, one of our customers has 12,000 applications, for example. Mapping and understanding those applications and understanding those relationships and grouping them. And new apps you have functions and regions and realms and criticality and lines of business and everything else. So you do all that in a granular way, and then you can map it to frameworks. And then the other thing you have to do is, which has been a really interesting value that we look at, as you put a policy in place, right, you have to you look at it and say, should I put this policy in place? And then you have to model it. And if I do put this in place, does it make me more or less compliant? Do I break any communications? Because obviously the worst thing you could do is, kind of shoot a friendly in this. So as you wrap a workload with a PCI asset, but with a PCI policy, understanding what that does it make you more or less compliant against a framework, against NIST or whatever it is, but also what happens to the business? So am I enabling an application to be stronger, but at what consequence? So mapping those things and modeling those things before you deploy it is also a really interesting value.
Yeah, that's. I wish I had that for some of the work that I was doing over the weekend.
You can download it. It's like literally it takes about 4 or 5 minutes to install, and you'll see value of all your application flows within an hour. So
yeah, well, because
it's free.
I find that's really hard, that anytime you want to put a policy in place that's going to dictate any kind of communications, knowing the impact of that in production is really hard. And it sounds like a component of your solution is to allow me to see what happens, similar to the firewall vendors that would do that in firewall policies, but you're doing that in a cloud and application environment.
Yeah, you're doing a cloud and application environment and all across your ESX and container estate. So modeling that and understanding that, once you've discovered the relationships and you've got the telemetry and modeling it and understanding the input, is a really great value to the operator, right?
Now, a lot of financials have their own private clouds. Could you explain that a little bit? Because I had to talk to one of my friends who's a developer that works with financials. And I was asking him about cloud. And he's like, well, yeah, basically they build their own. I'm like, hold on, how does that work?
Lots of people are transforming their virtual data centers to an SDN cloud, private cloud environment. Like I said, it could be based on Red Hat. It could be based on a bunch of different functionality. VMware is obviously pushing very, very hard in that arena. It's been a journey, right? Because as people build these private clouds, they don't know which applications to put on them in which sequence. Because again, when you're moving something from a traditional estate to any sort of cloud estate, you need to make sure that you understand the application flows. But no, it's certainly got momentum, particularly in financial institutions.
Yeah.
And then what they do then is they map that private cloud cost and say, is the public cloud cheaper or not? And there's always a cost benefit ROI. Also, I think there's a kind of a core versus context. If you're a financial institution, focus on being a financial institution. Some of this stuff, should you be in the infrastructure business at all?
Yeah, I think, and some are correct in building their own cloud infrastructure because of the performance and integrity and security that has to exist. They want to do it themselves, and so that still sounds like it's a trend in the financial sector.
Yeah, I go to New York pretty much every other week, and we were with probably 7 to 10 financial institutions last week in New York. And they all have private cloud, but they are all starting to explore public cloud. I mean, and Microsoft is really encouraging it. So Microsoft is really used to negotiating with enterprises. And so they lead with that to drive Azure adoption and Azure consumption. Obviously, AWS is the powerhouse. But there's quite a natural sales motion and contractual motion for Microsoft to really get some lift in their market share right now. And then we see Microsoft on a hell of a tear with Azure. Yeah,
I agree. We had representatives from Microsoft on the show last year, and could definitely, just from talking with them, they were all pushing, Azure and all the new features for applications.
Yeah, that's the whole supply chain is geared up to serve the enterprise, and so if they can leverage all these different contracts they have, whether it's the migration of a Windows 2003 servers and say, hey, you can't get them one-day maintenance anymore, move them to Azure or whatever it may be. But again, they will get stuck. Well, if you unplug a Windows 2003 server and it's running a bunch of really important stuff, what the hell happens, right?
Yeah.
So how do you migrate that?
Tim, how does your product interface with the application? Is there like a hook into the actual container or application? Like, how deep into the application do you go?
Yeah, so in a container environment, we would be a guest, right? So think of it like a CNI wrapper. In a virtual environment, we would be a guest, and you hang off the vSwitch. in an SDN world, there's a variety of different ways that you can integrate it. And obviously in the cloud world, you leverage the native APIs. But also, when you're a full API-based system, you can suck information from a variety of different sources to enrich the policy. So the telemetry can be gathered from our sensors, APIs, whatever it may be, to suck into the policy computation. But also, from, like I said earlier, from a CMDB to a ServiceNow, to enrich that, make the CMDB kind of more dynamic. But one of our customers has asked us to do an integration with an agent-based technology, so that the policy controller, the application controller, can suck information from our sensors plus the agent-based technology, and then even program the agent-based by updating the ACLs or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I definitely read into that when we first started looking at it when we were at Tenable, right? It's like, do you get the information from the API of the infrastructure, or do you put an agent on all the things that are deployed, whether they're VMs or containers? And there's, pluses and minuses to both. And it sounds like you can accomplish both.
Yeah, you can accomplish both. I mean, what we find with agent-based technologies is they have a great place in some of the legacy infrastructure, but they don't really exist in the private cloud and the public cloud environment. There's a bank that we're working with that's going to 10 million containers, right? I mean, you're not going to put an agent in every single one, right? So, that the agent model doesn't really work in that environment. So having an ability to collect information from a variety of sources is the only way to do it. And then the ability to program a variety of different sources is the only way to do it.
How challenging is it to manage applications at that scale? I know I've set up one container environment, and you can in software define the network, the storage, all of that. I mean, it's the same principles that we learned in the physical world, but now it's all virtual. How challenging is that? And what are some of the major challenges, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, well, we've raised like 127 million to try and figure it out.
Solve that problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was blonde haired and 160 pounds when I started this journey. So it's definitely a path. So understanding the frequency, the volume, the velocity of communications, but within the application flows, and then consuming that, and what would I say? Purifying that data to make it readable into a model with a bunch of machine learning, and then enriching with telemetry. So you've really got to understand the microservices architectures at a very deep level, sucking that in. There's some great technologies now that make that more scalable and more real to a customer real quick. So that, I think ingesting that volume of data and making sense of it has been one. The policy computation obviously is very sophisticated at that level. And then the modeling, I mean, there's a variety of steps, but it's been a journey. But it's been a fantastic one. One of the problems that we've always looked at is the size of this market is just gigantic. So whether you're doing a national power grid, or whether you're doing a cruise liner, or a nuclear submarine, or 12,000 applications at a service provider, it's absolutely bonkers how big the market is. So like I said earlier, the ability to do that, make it scale, but really make it simple and intuitive, so a church can literally download and use it, which they did, and they become a customer, without even talking to a salesperson. So it's quite tricky.
Yeah, that's really cool. I know looking at microservices architecture in and of itself is complex, and then extrapolating that out into thousands of different applications, in how they should communicate is that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, you got to do it by regulated asset though, right? So if you stick to, people only secure what they're told to by the regulators, right? Truthfully. So if you start off by really working with customers on critical assets, whether it's payment gateways, Active Directory, important databases, and things like that, and then you scale out. Most of our customers, frankly, nearly all of them, start with a very small order, 10, 20, 40, 50K, but they all grow because of the estate.
Right. And so when you find a policy violation, what does the remediation look like? Is that typically something a developer might have to fix? Is it ops? Is it security? Is it a mixture?
Yeah, so that's funny, right? So it's all about the operationalizing of security. I think, I've been in security now for like 20 years. I'm on the board of 3 or 4 companies and obviously run one. And the big thing that you've got to get across real quick is how do you operationalize this thing and make it simple to use? So obviously you have to send things to a SIM, right? We prevented a very large attack on a bank not long ago. And obviously we send the alert to a SIM, and as soon as a bank gets attacked, you have to trigger with a logging infrastructure, which is all totally good. But you also, you have to trigger things into, to an ITIL environment, so you launch the trouble ticket all the way back through. Mm-hmm. Because if the developer or any part of the infrastructure is not linking to IT, it just goes to security for a guy to try and find it and get the alert and do something about it. It's interesting, but what's more important now is to align with the business unit, because the buyer in a cloud environment is the line of business and the security guy.
Yeah.
And if you can operationalize this thing, so the flow goes back to the developer through almost like what is exactly a trouble ticket environment, mm-hmm. and then he can launch and solve the problem himself. Because you're giving them guardrails. So long as they stick within the guardrails, that's fine. But if they try and violate it or do something unusual, you've got to alert in a way that they can normally operate.
And so in terms of communications, are developers typically defining like what should communicate to what? Do they have those requirements?
The requirements are given to them by the security guy, the policy mm-hmm. guy, or the application security guy typically.
Yeah.
But again, you're starting off with an environment where most people, like 99% of customers, have no idea of the current application flows. So if you like, what could happen, and then mapping it into a CMDB or just into a policy computation engine, you could start to look at what should happen. So, it's a very interesting environment. But yeah, once they get that, then you can give them guardrails, and then away they go, and and you map those policies to a continuous kind of compliance framework. Mm-hmm. And then I think then I think the developer and security and compliance are aligned.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's maturing over time. I think we're seeing more adoption and more convergence of these teams certainly working together. Tim, what's an example of an anonymized customer success story where they had a lot of applications deployed in different cloud environments? Tell me about their aha moment of a success story.
Yeah, there's a very large bank that we work with, a Monster Bank, and they had to get compliant on the Swift payment gateway.
Yep.
They have assets in a virtual estate, in some physical estate, some cloud estate, and they were trying to steer it. And the regulation, the CSP, was pushing very, very hard to get it done. So they downloaded it over the web, they installed it really fast, but the discovering of the policies was critical, and so we were able to deploy all of the policies inside the bank around the Swift payment gateway within 2 weeks. Obviously, we had to have executive support because they had to make it as a priority. Because of the speed, we have the agility, but they have to give the permission. So yeah, the whole thing was deployed really, really fast.
Yeah. So just for context for our audience, 2 weeks is really fast, right? That's typically months or a year before you're getting something in compliance.
I'll give you the comparison. They had one guy working on an old legacy firewall for another payment gateway, and for 2 months made literally no headway. And they're like, I can't understand the ridiculous rules that they are trying to compute. The other thing to mention is that we price by workload, right? So if you're moving from one of our large customers in the Bay Area is moving from on-premise data center to the Azure data center cloud, and obviously they expand if they cover more workloads, but it's because it's portable, right? We don't care when you price by workload, and you don't care where it is because your policy is designed so you don't care where it is. So of course, right? So it's really nice to as you build these things, these companies, and you try and really align and work with really good customers and really, frankly, good friends, it's nice that they can take the value and use it wherever they are, in whatever cloud they are, which is really nice, as opposed to being, stick to a hierarchical vertical stack, which doesn't really work for us these days.
Sure. Sorry, Joff, questions for Tim. Sorry.
No, one of the things that was actually going through my head as you were talking about different things, I was firstly trying to get my head around what we're talking about, but one of the things that we started to see, in the early days of virtualization when it was deployed was a sudden sprawl of asset deployment, and I think we continued to see that in the form of combination of shadow IT and lots of different applications being driven by business units. So my question is this: is your proposal that you come to companies with, is it helping bring shadow IT back into the fold as you're bringing folks back into compliance with the regulatory-driven aspect of things?
Yeah. I mean, a great example, we have a customer down in Australia and New Zealand where they had no clue. Well, they had a feeling that some of the customers were putting things in Azure, but they didn't really know why or what for, or what it was about. And so we work with them, discovered again, we're an app-to-app company, right? Understand the app-to-app communications, and we can discover those communications and model them wherever they are from a policy perspective. And so, they were like, hey, go work out what's going on in our Azure state. Why are the developers putting it there? What the applications are doing? How vulnerable are they? Should this PCI asset be talking to that particular asset or not? Yeah. Easy model for that. It's a very simple swim lane. It's in the banks, it doesn't really exist too much, but as soon as you get out of the banks, it exists quite a lot.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating, because I think it sort of brings, and I'm first of all, I assume you're correct that in the banks it's not going to happen a lot because they tend to have the big sledgehammer. But other industries, it'll bring things, I think, kind of full circle, where people just sort of come back into the fold and realize that the compliance and the risk factors surrounding that are too great, and you have a solution that really wraps forward path for that. So that's really kind of interesting. Yeah,
about 2 or 3 years ago. 3 years ago, you would have said to me that all of the banks that you're talking to, all the banks you've known for years, are going to embrace public cloud. I would have said, yeah, maybe, but who knows? Now you talk to them all. There's one in Europe that we had a big customer of ours. And honestly, a year ago, they were not saying public cloud. But we gave a big strategy update with them like last Thursday or something. And they're like, yeah, we're embracing public cloud. And we're moving to containers, but we're going to do that in the eyes of we're moving our apps to containers to move into public cloud. And it's fascinating how fast that market is moving. Fascinating.
It sounds like, Tim, you're enabling that movement.
Yeah, if you can understand provenance and stuff, you can really drive better sense of origin of where the application's coming from, better sense of policy around it, and way better compliance.
That's awesome. Tim, where can people learn more about vArmour?
Come to our website, vArmour.com. And again, there's a little 90-second video on our website that describes what we do, probably better than what I do. But it's 90 seconds and it's a little graphical thing. And if anybody wants to use it, it's free. You can just download it off the website and on you go.
Awesome. Tim, thank you so much for appearing on Application.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's awesome. With
Have
that,
a great Monday.
You too. With that, we'll take a short break, come back, talk about the application security news for this week. Stay tuned.